Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Richard Foss. I'm a culinary historian who has worked long with the Riverside Dickens Festival and is delighted to talk to you today about Charles Dickens' favorite beverage. But first, we should have a reading from the great man himself. From David Copperfield, at a moment when Wilkins Micawber, the beloved clerk, is having a very, very bad day. I informed Mr. Micawber that I relied upon him for a bowl of punch, and led him to the lemons. His recent despondency, not to say despair, was gone in a moment. I never saw a man so thoroughly enjoy himself amid the fragrance of lemon peel and sugar, the odor of burning rum, and the steam of boiling water, as Mr. Micawber did that afternoon. It was wonderful to see his face shining out of a thin cloud of those delicate fumes as he stirred and mixed and tasted and looked as though he were making, instead of punch, a fortune for his family, down to the latest posterity. There are many old English drinking songs and poems about the joys of drinking punch. Charles Dickens is the only person who did that lyrical description of the joys of making it. In asking Mr. Micawber to make it, he is distracted from his own problems, which, as usual, are monetary, and he was led into this wonderful practice of making punch. But to a modern American, that sounds rather odd, because to a modern American, punch is something generally drunk by children, generally a very sweet beverage that comes from a can with someone wearing a Hawaiian shirt on it, or perhaps something made up quickly from a powder or a mix, or if you were lucky, some sort of lemonade or orangeade. And here are these descriptions of burning rum and lemon peel. Let me tell you a little bit about the English, going back well before Dickens' own era. The English loved to take beverages, everyday beverages, and make them wonderful with a particular combination of spices. We know about that combination of spices and just how far back it goes, from a contemporary of William Shakespeare, who included within one of his plays a song by a drunkard that includes the repeating line, "Nose, nose, jolly red nose, what gave me my jolly red nose? Cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, and cloves, and that gave me my jolly red nose." Well, cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, and cloves in Shakespeare's day weren't put in rum because they didn't have it. What they did have was beer and wine and occasionally distilled alcohols from the continent, and in all of those they made beverages by heating it, adding these spices, and creating this rich, luxurious beverage. Keep in mind, in that era, cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, and cloves, these are all imported spices. Now to this, when the English start having them available, they add citrus. Again, an imported item that does not grow in England except in a greenhouse with much coaxing. And with that, they make a beverage that by Dickens's own era is the delight of the upper class. It's what they made when they were entertaining. And we don't have to guess how much Dickens enjoyed this particular beverage because of the fact that he left us a letter. And that letter he wrote to his cousin Amelia. And when he wrote this to Amelia Filano in 1847, she had asked for the recipe for a punch that he had made, and he sent this recipe with the note, "I hope it will make you a beautiful punch maker, in more senses than one." Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the process of making punch, but I'm also going to actually do it. And I am starting out with a few advantages that Mr. Dickens did not have. I assume that Charles Dickens would have used a crock pot, for instance, instead of the method that he used, which involved taking a basin of hot alcohol and moving it from an oven to and from an oven after mixing it. Well, if Mr. Dickens had had a crock pot, he would have used it, and so will I. And the first thing I'm going to add to that crock pot, which I've had heating for a while, are some lemon peels. This itself may look a little bit odd to you because lemon peels? Aren't you used to using the interior of the lemon rather than the peels? Well, those peels contain some oil that adds to the richness and enjoyability of an alcohol. So we take the lemons and we take some sugar. That looks like a lot of sugar. Don't worry, it's going to taste great. We take the lemons and the sugar and we turn the crock pot up to high. You always do this, incidentally, with a crock pot that has been warmed, because you're going to see there's going to be a temperature change here and you don't want to crack your crock pot. So we start out with the lemons and sugar and sort of let them toast for a little while. The English enjoyed beverages that had a silky kind of feel to them, and the lemon oil as well as the lemon juice adds a great deal to this. The English also, historically, had been drinkers of distilled spirits. Gin from Holland, which was associated with the lower class in Dickens's era. Occasionally whiskey from Scotland and Ireland, but the one that they loved was brandy. And they had one little problem with brandy, which is they don't make it in England. It comes mainly from Portugal, France, and Spain. And at various times, England was at war with France and Spain, and occasionally with Portugal. So especially during the Napoleonic Wars, they started using a produce from their own colonies, which was rum. Now, in Dickens's own favorite rum recipe, he used both. So I'm going to add some Jamaican rum, and I'll mention that I'm going to be giving you this recipe later and letting you know where you may find it on my own website. And I'm making a half batch of this. So we take some rum, Jamaican rum of the type that would have been most accessible in Dickens's own era, a dark rum, and some cognac. Dickens, we know from Dickens's own cellars that he ordered a lot of Courvoisier VSOP. You may use Courvoisier if you happen to feel like making an absolutely decadent, wonderful, beautiful punch. You may also use a less expensive one. I happen to be using Hennessy right at the moment. There's another one called Reynal, which, while not a cognac, is a French brandy that has very much the same flavor as the Courvoisier that was in Dickens's own cellar. And I'm going to let this just steep for a minute or two. Well, I mentioned that Dickens's era was an empire. Rum was flowing into England mainly from the Caribbean, but all around the world. It was an everyday beverage for English sailors. They had a rum ration. They did not, of course, have the joys of something like this to enliven their rum ration, but they did have citrus, they did have sugar. We know about the history of rum in England because as far back as the early 1700s, rum was part of the rations for the English in the tropics. Rum and citrus, so they could make their own punch. We presume that they may have flavored it with spices, whatever they had available. So we take this now and we've let this heat for a little bit, and I'm going to read Mr. Dickens's own recipe. To make 3 pints of punch, peel into 1 very strong common basin, which may be broken in case of accident without damage to the owner's piece or pocket. Dickens couldn't even write a recipe without throwing in a little joke there. Add the rinds of 3 lemons, cut very thin, and with as little as possible of the white coating between the peel and the fruit. Why as little of the white coating? The white coating is very, very bitter. The lemon rind has some sweetness and some oiliness, so when you peel that lemon, peel it very, very thin. I did as Mr. Dickens could not. I used a modern peeler, and I used a modern lemon squeezer. This means that when Mr. Dickens comes to one of the other instructions, I have it all covered. Add a double handful of lump sugar. Well, a double handful of lump sugar is actually going to be, in this case, about 6 ounces of sugar, a pint of good old rum, and a large wine glass full of brandy. If it not be a large claret glass, say 2. Set this on fire. Yes, he did say set this liquid on fire. Why? Why would you set this on fire? Well, remember that what I have right here, right now, is a mixture of sugar and lemon and alcohol. And what I'm doing when I set it on fire, I am caramelizing the sugar so it'll have a nice smoky caramelized flavor. I am extracting some of the oil from the lemon peels. And one other thing, I'm burning off a little of the alcohol. There are tales of English ladies who went out with their husbands and would say, "Oh, do let the punch burn for a while. I do like the smoky flavor." Well, what they like is for their husbands not to be completely drunk. So an English gentleman might take it. Now, Mr. Dickens said that the best way to do this is to take a silver spoon, put some rum in it, set that rum on fire, and lower it in there. I'm using something that Mr. Dickens, I'm sure, also would have used, a barbecue lighter. And now, if I could have the camera come right over here and take a picture, you can see that we have some flaming rum. And you can see where the sugar is igniting, the lemon peels are igniting just a little bit. And now, as we have gotten the fire going, I'm going to put the lid back on. Now, I mentioned that you set this on fire partly to extract some of the alcohol. But there's a reason why, if you ordered some of this punch in a punch house, that people would want to make sure that they lit this fire, even if only momentarily. And the reason is, that's how you know that the landlord is honest. That's how you know that you're getting an honest amount of liquor, because if it won't burn, there isn't enough rum and brandy in it. So, we have this, we followed along to Mr. Dickens's recipe, to where we have this punch, this mixture that has briefly been burned. Let it burn for a few moments at least, stirring it from time to time. Well, I actually made a mistake there, but I'm going to recover. There we go. Now, I will warn you, if you do this at home, and I really do hope that you do, first of all, do not use a crock pot with a plastic lid. Putting a plastic lid back onto burning punch creates a very unfortunate situation. Second of all, you must be careful about one thing, which is, it's very difficult to see the flames on alcohol. You may light this and not know. So be careful. You stir the punch once in a while and you will see those wonderful flames coming up. And yes, I probably shouldn't have used a wooden spoon, but I did, because it never actually seems to catch on fire. And this punch is one that can be drunk warm or cold. But, of course, there's no question which people would have liked on a cool London night. If you're seeing this on a January or February in California or wherever, I encourage you to try this punch hot. But it will be just as good the next day. So, letting it burn for just a moment. The English have a long tradition of hot beverages, and I mentioned one thing about those 4 spices that they used. Think about the smells that you associate with Christmas. Think about the pomanders and the other scented candles. Those smells are cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, and cloves. At Christmas, modern Californians and people all over the world revert to a very traditionally English palate. And I'm going to call this done enough. Beautiful. We revert to that traditionally English palate, and we enjoy our cinnamon, ginger, nutmegs, and cloves. It's the flavors and smells of Christmas. Extinguish it by covering the basin with a tray, which will put out the flame. Then squeeze in the juice of 3 lemons and add a quart of boiling water. I just happen to have the juice of 3 lemons. Actually 1½ because I'm making a half portion. And the water, which I have just boiled. At this crisis, having skimmed off the lemon pips with a spoon, you may taste. Well, I used a modern lemon squeezer, so I didn't have to worry about the lemon pips, but if you have particularly seedy lemons, you might run those through a strainer so you don't have any bits in there. If not sweet enough, add sugar to your liking, but observe that it will be a little sweeter presently. Pour the whole into a jug, tie a leather or coarse cloth over the top, so as to exclude the air completely, and stand it in a hot oven 10 minutes, or on a hot stove 1/4 of an hour. Well, here is where Mr. Dickens would have loved the crock pot, because all I do is take it and turn it down. And now I wait. I'm not going to make you wait the entire time, but I'm going to let you trust when you try it. All you need to do is leave it in the crock pot for about half an hour, and it will be wonderful. Or rather, 10 minutes, as he said. So, keep it as it comes to the table in a warm place near the fire, but not too hot. If it be intended to stand 3 or 4 hours, take the lemon peel out, or it will have a bitter taste. Well, this recipe shows Charles Dickens, the sensualist, because he was. Charles Dickens was someone who loved his food and drink, and when you read in Dickens, when you read about Mr. Micawber making punch, you want some. When you read about the feast that he describes, you want some. But when he describes a disgusting meal, you are disgusted. This is the art of a great writer. He wrote lyrically about food and drink because, as a child, Dickens himself had been poor. He had not been able to experience things like this wonderful punch that we're making today. And throughout Dickens's life, he took great joy in the good things in life. And I hope you all will too. Now you may be wondering, I talked about the cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, and cloves. When do you add those? And the answer is that just as you serve it, at the very last moment, you can add a little bit of good quality spices. I do recommend a tiny bit of cloves. You can use ground cloves rather than grinding your own. A tiny bit of ground white ginger, just a splash to stir over it, because it makes it so fragrant. But one thing you must not get ground, which is your nutmeg. Nutmeg oxidizes very, very quickly and loses the beautiful scent that you want from this. So grind your own nutmeg, get a nutmeg grater and a whole nutmeg, and do it fresh, and you will have a much more enjoyable experience. I hope this gives you a chance to bring a flavor of Dickens's own era to your home. And you can do that by finding his recipe. It's on my website, richardfoss.com. That's RICHARDFOSS.com. Just check in the blog post section and you'll find it there. I hope you'll try this, I hope you'll enjoy it, and I hope you will raise a glass to the day when we may all get together again. Thank you.